Now it's probably a good time to share a little, like, our exchange. Me and Evan had an exchange on email, and I was just being, it was like 9 p.m. at night. I was just being kind of like sloppy with my word choices. And my question was something, because I was like sharing like what we can talk about. It was something like, well, how do you get objectivity when you're writing? Like, how do you get an objective sense of, like, if it's doing what you want to do, if it's communicating what you want to communicate? And I think Evan, I hope I'm getting your sentiment right. It's like, I'm not sure I like that word or something like that. And but yeah, that's, I mean, I think ultimately we are on the same page, because I didn't mean objectivity. I meant something like, how do you get like a useful insight into your writing, and something to reveal what you really meant, or what you can gain from it and what you can learn from it. And that's of course different than like objectivity, like you were saying, in a more kind of like strict sense. So yeah, like how, I mean, it's kind of a weird, messy process, because you're bouncing it off, if it's somebody else, or if it's just your future self, like later on down the road or something. Um, how do you get like a useful insight into like this thing you poured out, when you're looking to tighten it up and make it into something that can be a publishable piece, if that makes sense as a question.
Morgan, you want to kick this one off? No pressure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, if it,
How do I tighten my work up? God, what do they say?
well,
Killing your darlings. Um, well, it's tough because I don't know. Like sometimes I feel like if you get rid of too much, you get rid of what you actually wanted on the page. But then at the same time, I feel like sometimes you really need to make it more concise, or choose a different word, or take that line out that just didn't stick out to you and just was kind of there, but keep that favorite word and think about why is that, or say that a line sticks out to you and you're like, why does, at least this is what I try to do, is why does this line stick out to me so much? Like, what do I love about this line? And why does it just capture me? And I, if it's not a line like that, I try to really look at it and see if I need it or not. But then at the same time, this is not an easy process, because you're looking, it's hard to go from like, I'm looking at the wholeness of a poem, to narrowing it down to the technical line or even word of it. And that is a really tough thing to do, especially with your own work, I think, because we're looking at it through a different lens than a reader who is not the one who has written it. So I don't think there's any easy answer or one answer to this. It's kind of just cut through the brush as much as you can and hope that you keep what you meant to start out with. And if you haven't, you can always go back. You can always go, like, I always save my first drafts and all of that part of the process, because if I'm looking at a poem and I'm it's just not what I thought it was at the beginning, or I'm not as happy with it, I will kind of look at the earlier versions and see if I've cut out something that, oh, maybe that's interesting, maybe I should kind of expand on that. So
Oh, yeah, Morgan, thank you for putting words to that. I think, like, I love how
it's
you
a
sort
tough
of,
question.
yeah, no, it's so good. And I love how you sort of started with the like, kill your darlings, which I think is something that we've heard before, and also has a sort of like violence and a little bit less nuance than I think we actually mean when like doing a writing process. Like just this weekend, I actually said to like some of my other poets, I feel like this weekend, there's some more times that I sort of asked my darlings if they wanted to step aside, so that like, to be like, I want to know, like, I want to sort of imagine them having agency to teach me about whether they are necessary or not. And actually to trust that a lot of the times if I ask, and for me, the asking is, let me remove it and see how it reads, is then like, oh yeah, no, it doesn't need to be here. Or it makes itself known. And it's like, wait a minute, no, this is necessary. And so yeah, I think I understand why we use that sort of brutal language. Um, uh, and I think it's because um, when we have, or for me, when I develop personal attachment to a piece, there's a sort of violence that I need to commit towards myself in order to move the piece on through time. But if I'm in a dance with the piece and it feels more like pruning or more like gardening or some more of a dance, then it sort of reduces that sense of violence. Another thing that you and Aaron, this is also connected to what you were saying about believability, what makes a poem believable. Um, when Morgan was sharing how important it was for her to get vulnerable and to just sort of say what was going on in her life, to me, that's such a part of emotional believability of like, regardless of factual objectivity, that the part of bearing the soul and really showing yourself being ugly to like showing yourself as three-dimensional like makes us a speaker into a flawed human. I think all of us have seen those poems that are polished that that polish away the speaker's flaws, not just the poem's flaws, until it becomes sterile. I know I've done that to some of my own poems. But I think that sometimes that thing that I have to go back and hunt for my early drafts is a part where the lump was really in my throat, or my voice cracked in some way while writing.
Yeah, yeah, there's so much there, so much good stuff. Do you find is it a combination of like just rereading it through time, and then also getting like, a trusted person to give you a little bit of like, course correction?
Thank you for
So
asking.
yeah, it's got to be,
I want to
I
hop
think
right
the
back
answer
in.
is both, right?
Yeah, and like to that latter point, I think just like Morgan was saying about we can't ever really know what the reader is like. Like, yes, I read over often, but to me, another critical part of building believability is testing it out on other people. And that means community, that means community through time. And that's hard because some parts of writing are so preciously solo and need to be. It's like this combination where you need the solitude to come into a deep relationship with yourself and what your words are saying, and this beautiful moment to test and ask, is this doing what I think it's doing? And like sometimes that's nice to do in a one-on-one, but for me the progression is usually a one-on-one, and then it's in a group where I can hear multiple voices disagree about parts of my poem. And I love those moments, or when I disagree with somebody else about somebody else's craft choice, where I think it does this beautiful thing where as a writer, when you hear two people disagree over a part, it helps you exercise this muscle of not being precious and not thinking that any one move was actually the clear and key move, right? Like I think I can become very proud of myself with my craft. Like, oh, I did it just so. And the fact that I broke the line there is the reason that the poem is good, like get really reinforced about my own power and influence, when it's like, fucking no, like art is a mystery. We don't understand how it works. And part of helping me remember how much of a mystery it is happens when I see two people disagree about a choice I made. It's just really important part of the process for me.
This might sound like a tangent, but I think I can bring these back together. So a lot of what we're talking about has to do with the negative, particularly trauma, exercising trauma, thinking about trauma, and to what extent you can use writing for catharsis, sharing that and having somebody else kind of witness some deep element of that. And I've done a lot of that for sure. But this would be a question for anybody who wants to tangle with it about proof of concept when you read in a group. So this could be for an audience or it could be for a writer's group. if you're talking about trauma, everybody's going to be a little bit more locked up and shy about honest criticism. So it's if they disagree, then you kind of get to see an organic, okay, that's because they're not challenging you, they're talking to each other about what it means. But there's still this tendency, if it's about something very serious, physical illness, for instance. In my case, all of mine is about my dad, who is my favorite person, but who's also like borderline schizophrenic and has some deep-seated mental health issues. My cheat for that, and I don't know how much this is a cheat or if it's legitimate, is humor, because you can do humor in front of an audience of maybe one or more people, and if it's funny, they laugh, and if it's not funny, they don't. And it's the only kind of immediate, like, okay, this thing worked. When I formulated this line in my head, I was hoping we'd get a laugh, and you just hear the audience like, and like nervous, obligated, whatever. But when they really laugh, they really laugh. And I think that's one of the reasons we like stand-up comedians so much, is they get honed in a way, trial by fire, that might be a little different than a writer's workshop, where there's a little bit more, nobody wants to hurt anybody else's feelings. And so I like writing funny, partly because you get to focus group it with a very literal, very serious razor to cut off the fat and sides.